I was standing in the doorway of my own kitchen when my daughter's voice sliced through the noise of Christmas Eve. "Where are you? You incompetent! The dinner isn't ready, and my guests are staring at empty plates." The words hit me so hard my grip loosened on the tray I was carrying. My name is Helen Brooks. I'm 69 years old, and tonight, in the house I paid off with a lifetime of double shifts and a husband long gone, my daughter spoke to me like I was staff she regretted hiring. For a second, the world around me dimmed. The living room glowed with warm lights, soft music, and people laughing, people I barely knew, people Lauren had invited to show off her perfect life. Their conversations quieted when her voice rose. I could feel their eyes drifting toward the kitchen, pretending not to listen, pretending not to pity me. The steam from the roasted vegetables fogged my glasses as I set the tray on the counter. I caught my reflection in the oven door, cheeks flushed, hair falling loose, shoulders curled as if bracing for impact. I barely recognized the woman staring back. I used to feel proud in this kitchen. Now it felt like a place where my worth shrank a little more each day. Lauren appeared in the doorway, arms tight across her chest, the kind of posture she took in court when someone disappointed her. "Mom, can you please get it together? This night matters," she whispered sharply, as though my existence threatened everything she wanted people to believe about her. A small tremor moved through me, anger, humiliation, maybe both. I didn't say a word. I simply lifted the tray again and walked toward the dining room, pretending my heart wasn't cracking. None of them knew it yet, but this Christmas Eve would be the last time my daughter ever spoke to me that way. 3 years before that Christmas Eve, the night my daughter called me incompetent in front of a room full of strangers, she had shown up at my front door looking small in a way I hadn't seen since she was a teenager. It was late January, the kind of Ohio cold that made the air feel sharp. And when I opened the door, snowflakes clung to Lauren's hair like bits of frost. She stood there with 2 sleepy children leaning against her legs, and Michael hovered behind her, carrying a stack of suitcases. "Mom, can we come in?" she asked, her voice trembling just enough to make my heart twist. I stepped aside without a second thought. Emma stumbled in first, rubbing her eyes, while little Noah climbed straight into my arms as if he had been waiting all day to do it. Michael offered a quick, uncomfortable smile, the kind people use when they're embarrassed, but trying to disguise it with politeness. They sat in the living room, still wearing their coats, explaining how the housing market had turned on them. A deal fell through. The rental they were counting on was suddenly unavailable. Their finances were tied up, and they needed just a few months to figure things out. I felt the softness inside me rise, the urge to fix things for my child, even though she was old enough to have children of her own. I told them the guest rooms were ready, and they could stay as long as they needed. Lauren burst into tears and hugged me so tight my ribs ached. In that moment, welcoming them home felt right. My house had been too quiet since my husband passed. Their laughter, their footsteps, even their chaos brought life back into it. The first few months were almost sweet. Lauren helped me cook on weekends, humming while chopping vegetables. Michael repaired the loose hinge on the back gate. The kids filled every corner with drawings, toys, and the kind of noise only children can create. It wasn't perfect, but it felt like family, the way I remembered it from years ago, before life scattered us in different directions. I told myself that maybe this was a second chance. Maybe living together again would heal the small fractures between Lauren and me, the ones I'd never spoken about but always felt when she rushed through conversations or skipped holidays because she was too busy for a while. I believed that. But slowly, so slowly I didn't understand it was happening, the balance shifted. It started with small things. Lauren would come home exhausted and drop her purse on the kitchen counter before saying, "Mom, could you start dinner? I had a brutal day." I didn't mind. She worked long hours at the firm, and cooking eased me. But then, it wasn't just dinner. She began asking if I could pick up the kids from school when she got stuck in meetings. Then Michael started texting me during the day, asking if I could sign for packages, wait for the plumber, fold a load of laundry so he wouldn't fall behind. I told myself they were stressed. I told myself families helped each other. But after a while, the favors weren't favors anymore. They were expectations. One afternoon, I mentioned groceries while Lauren poured herself a glass of wine. I said I hadn't seen their share of the bill in a while, not meaning it as an accusation, just a gentle reminder. She wrapped her arm around my shoulders and kissed my temple like she used to when she wanted something as a kid. "Mom, do you know how much we'd have to spend on childcare if you weren't here?" she said lightly. "You're saving us." "Really?" Her tone was sweet, but there was something beneath it, a kind of entitlement I couldn't quite place. Still, I laughed it off. I convinced myself I was imagining it, but it became harder to ignore the changes. They stopped asking. Things simply became my job. The laundry in the basket, the lunch boxes, the grocery lists pinned to the fridge in Lauren's handwriting, the dishes after long dinners, the school forms, the errands, the cleaning, the cooking. The routines that used to belong to them slowly, silently shifted onto me. The first time I felt something was wrong was a rainy Thursday afternoon. I had a doctor's appointment scheduled, finally ready to address the pain in my knee that had been getting worse. Diane, my neighbor, had offered to drive me. But that morning, Lauren burst into the kitchen in a panic about a last-minute hearing, and the babysitter had canceled unexpectedly. She looked at me the way someone looks at a lifeline. "Mom, please, can you stay with the kids? Just today. I can't lose this case." I didn't even hesitate. I canceled my appointment, telling myself I'd reschedule. I didn't, and when Diane knocked on my door later asking why I hadn't gone, I told her I'd simply forgotten. She didn't say anything at first. She just watched me with this look, sad, knowing, almost protective. "Be careful, Helen," she said softly. "You matter too." Her words lingered inside me longer than I was ready to admit. Back then, I had no idea how much worse things would get, or how much of myself I would lose in the process. But the unraveling had already begun. And I didn't even see it. The shift from helping my daughter to becoming the person who kept the entire household running didn't happen in one day. It crept in quietly, settling into the corners of my routine until there was no part of my life it hadn't touched. By the middle of the second year, I was waking up before everyone else, moving through the house like a shadow, packing lunches, starting laundry, unloading the dishwasher, and making coffee for people who rarely noticed it was hot when they grabbed it. I kept telling myself it was temporary. That family pulled together when one branch was struggling. But somehow, the struggle never seemed to end, and neither did the work I did to keep them afloat. One evening, Lauren announced she needed to host a dinner for several colleagues from her firm. I thought she meant she wanted to use the dining room, maybe cook a small meal together like we used to. But on the night of the dinner, she breezed into the kitchen in a crisp blazer, barely glancing at me as she asked, "Mom, is the roast done? They'll be here in 20. In that moment, I realized she hadn't planned to cook at all. Everything, the menu, the timing, the serving, rested on me. I felt my chest tighten, but I said nothing. I carved the roast, plated the sides, arranged the table settings exactly the way she liked them. When her co-workers arrived, I smiled and greeted them. But when Lauren introduced me, she didn't say, "This is my mom." She said, "This is Helen. She helps us around the house." The words landed with a heaviness that stayed with me long after the guests left, and I was alone at the sink washing dishes that weren't mine. It wasn't just the dinner. The more Lauren excelled at work, the more invisible I seemed to become at home. She would call from the courthouse and say, "Mom, can you pick up Emma? I'm drowning." Or, "Mom, could you run to the store?" As if my time existed solely to fill the gaps in her life. Michael wasn't any better. He would stroll into the kitchen with a stack of mail and place it beside my coffee cup without a word, as if deciding which bills to pay were suddenly my responsibility. Whenever I hesitated, even for a second, Lauren had a way of looking at me that made me feel like I was failing her, as though being tired or having my own plans meant I was somehow ungrateful for being included in their lives. She loved to call me dramatic when I said I needed a break. The more she said it, the more I believed it. One afternoon, I was lifting Noah into his booster seat when my knees buckled. Pain shot through my leg, sharp enough to make me gasp. Lauren was rushing to grab her purse before a meeting, and when she saw me gripping the car door, she rolled her eyes. "Mom, please don't start this again. I'm already late." I swallowed the pain and forced a smile. "I'm fine. Go. I've got him." Her door slammed before I finished the sentence. Later that day, when Diane saw me struggling to carry a bag of groceries, she walked over and took the bag from my hands without asking. "Helen, are you all right?" she asked, her voice low. I shrugged it off, but the truth was, I wasn't all right. I was exhausted, not the kind that sleep can fix, but the kind that settles into your bones when you feel your existence shrinking. Diane invited me over for tea. I almost said no, afraid of falling behind on what I had to do at home, but the look in her eyes made me sit down. She studied me for a moment, long enough to make me uncomfortable. "What's happening in that house?" she finally asked. I told her little pieces. Nothing too revealing at first. The missed doctor's appointment, the unpaid groceries, the endless list of chores. Diane didn't push. She listened the way true friends do, letting silence fill the gaps until I spoke again. When I was done, she placed her hand over mine. "Helen," she said slowly, choosing each word carefully. "This doesn't sound like helping family. This sounds like you're being used." I felt my stomach twist. "They're just overwhelmed," I said quickly. "They need me." She squeezed my hand gently. "Needing you is one thing. Treating you like you don't have a life of your own is another. You deserve more than this." Her words rattled me. The idea that what I was experiencing had a name, that it might be something darker than I'd allowed myself to consider, was almost too much to take in. I left her house more unsettled than when I arrived, not because she had been unkind, but because part of me knew she was right. The truth was beginning to surface in places I had tried so hard to ignore, and soon, something would happen that would shatter every excuse I had been clinging to. The day I discovered the folder with my name on it didn't feel extraordinary at first. It was a Tuesday, quiet and gray, the kind of morning when the house felt colder than it should. I had gone upstairs to drop off a basket of folded clothes in the small room Michael used as his office. The desk was cluttered with papers, coffee cups, and a stack of envelopes he'd been meaning to handle. Nothing unusual. I'd walked into that room 100 times before, but when I set the basket down, my elbow brushed the edge of the desk, and a thin file slipped off the pile and scattered across the floor. I bent down to gather the pages, annoyed at myself for being clumsy. Then I saw my own name printed across the top of a document in bold letters. Brooks. Helen. Proposed guardianship and long-term care plan. For a moment, everything inside me went still. The room felt too quiet, as if someone had sucked the sound out of the air. I lifted the first page, telling myself there had to be some misunderstanding. Maybe it was part of Michael's work. Maybe it wasn't about me at all. But the words on the page were painfully clear. It described concerns about my declining cognitive ability and increasing confusion. It detailed reasons why a legal guardian, specifically Lauren, should be appointed to manage my affairs. and attached to it was a draft outline of transferring my house into a living trust controlled by Lauren and Michael for tax efficiency and long-term planning. My hands began to shake. I told myself I shouldn't read more, that I was invading their privacy, but my name was on every page, and my life, my home, my independence was being dissected in cold, professional language. I read anyway. There was an email thread between Lauren and someone at a care facility an hour away. They were discussing availability for a long-term stay, asking questions about memory evaluations and insurance coverage. Another email mentioned the need to document signs of disorientation. I felt physically ill as I held the pages, the weight of each word pressing against my chest. I thought about the canceled doctor's appointment, the way Lauren dismissed my pain, the times she insisted I'd forgotten things I knew I had done. I thought about how she introduced me as someone who helped around the house, as if acknowledging me as her mother complicated the story she wanted others to believe. Part of me screamed that this couldn't be real. My daughter, the girl I raised, the child who used to curl against me during thunderstorms, she wouldn't do this. She wouldn't put my name on paperwork that treated me like a burden to be managed. But another part of me, quieter, older, exhausted, knew the truth even before I admitted it. Something had shifted in Lauren long before I noticed. Maybe it was the pressure of work. Maybe it was resentment. Maybe it was convenience. But somewhere along the way, she'd started seeing me as part of the infrastructure of her life, not a human being with autonomy. I sank onto the edge of the bed, the document spread across my lap. My heart beat so hard it felt like it was trying to escape. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the words that were about to change everything. It felt like a betrayal deeper than anything I'd imagined, because it wasn't just unkindness or taking advantage or dismissing me. This was an attempt to erase my voice entirely. When I finally gathered the papers, I tucked them back into the file exactly as I had found them. Before I left the room, I took photos of every page with trembling hands. I didn't know what I planned to do with them yet. All I knew was that I needed proof, something solid, something undeniable. That evening, the house felt different. Lauren breezed in after work, talking fast about a case she was fighting. Michael asked what was for dinner. The kids ran past me with backpacks open and homework spilling out. Everything looked normal, but inside my chest was a storm so loud I could barely hear them. Lauren mentioned the folder in passing, saying she needed to get ahead on some long-term planning. She didn't notice the way I froze. She didn't see how the light dimmed behind my eyes. She just kept talking, assuming I would absorb whatever she said. For the first time, I didn't. I excused myself and went next door to Diane's. She opened the door and knew immediately something was wrong. My voice shook as I told her what I had found. She listened, her jaw tightening with every detail. When I finished, she didn't mince her words. "Helen," she said, steady and sure, "this is not just taking advantage. This is an attempt to take your life away from you." Her certainty cracked something open inside me. The denial I'd been clinging to fell apart. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't overreacting. What I had found was real and dangerous. Diane took my hand and said we needed to talk to someone who understood the law, someone who could tell me what my rights were before Lauren and Michael made their next move. That was the night I realized I couldn't stay silent anymore. And it was the first night in a long time I felt fear sharpen into something else. Resolve. The weeks after discovering that folder felt like walking through my own home with a stranger's shadow stretching close behind me. I moved quietly, watching instead of speaking, carrying the weight of what I knew like a stone in my pocket. Diane kept urging me to meet the attorney she trusted, and after several sleepless nights, I finally agreed. Naomi Clark's office was warm, lined with shelves of case files and a single lamp that softened the room. She looked younger than I expected, but her voice carried the calm certainty of someone who had seen people in my situation before. I handed her the photos of the documents. She read each page slowly, her brow tightening. "Helen," she said at last, "this is not planning. This is an attempt to take control of your life. You're competent, and the law is on your side." Her words steadied me in a way I hadn't felt in years. Naomi updated my legal documents, added protections to the deed of my home, and told me to keep record of everything. She said there might come a moment when I would have to stand up publicly, and I needed to be prepared. I didn't know then that the moment she spoke of would arrive on Christmas Eve. After Lauren called me incompetent in front of her guests, a quiet resolve rose inside me. I finished setting the dinner on the table, every movement deliberate. Diane sat near the end, her eyes holding steady encouragement. My brother Frank, who had flown in under the pretense of a holiday visit, watched me with somber understanding. When Lauren lifted her glass to make a toast, her voice glowing with pride, I stood up before she could finish. "I need to speak," I said. The room fell silent. I walked to the sideboard, opened the drawer, and placed the printed documents on the table. The bold title glared up at us. Lauren's face paled. "These," I said, "are the plans my daughter and her husband made for my life without my consent." A ripple of shock passed through the guests. Michael straightened, searching for something to say. Lauren shook her head, tears forming. "Mom, you're misunderstanding." "No," I said gently. "For once, I'm not." I told them about the guardianship proposal, the planned transfer of my home, and the conversations about placing me in a facility. I didn't raise my voice. The calmness in me came from finally seeing the truth without excuses. Lauren stepped closer, her voice breaking. "I thought you needed help. You forget things. You get overwhelmed." "I forget because I'm tired," I said. "And I'm overwhelmed because you treat me like I don't belong in my own life." She cried then. But I didn't fold the way I once would have. I told them legal protections were already in place, that they had 30 days to move out, that if they pushed this further, I would pursue legal action. And I had witnesses who understood exactly what had been happening. Guests gathered their coats and slipped out in uneasy silence. When the door closed, Lauren collapsed into a chair, sobbing. I stood beside her, feeling sadness but also relief. The truth had finally been spoken aloud. In the weeks that followed, they packed their things. The house grew quiet, but the quiet felt honest. I reclaimed my bedroom, painted the walls a warm color, and planted new flowers in the yard. I joined a watercolor class and started walking with Diane in the mornings. For the first time in years, the rhythm of my days belonged to me. Lauren visits now with a careful softness. She asks before stepping into a room. She thanks me without prompting. I listen, but I no longer shrink. Whatever our future holds, it will rest on boundaries that should have existed long ago. And when I stand in my kitchen today, sunlight warming the counter, I no longer hear her calling me incompetent. I hear my own voice, steady, unafraid, finally saying, "I'm still here." And being here, present in my own life again, feels like the kind of victory I once believed was no longer possible for me.